Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. I hope you're having an amazing day. We're going to start today's video out with some leaked benchmarks for AMD's upcoming Zen 5 processors. This is the 16-core variant, which of course is the Ryzen 9 9950X, and the results are very impressive for these leaked benchmarks. And then we're going to move on to the PlayStation 5. Specifically, this is a very intriguing topic where there are reports that Sony are actually working on PlayStation 3 emulation. And I decided to reach out to a couple of my sources. I want to give you guys some updates to this because there are some very interesting things that Sony are allegedly working on. So let's just get right into it. So the Ryzen 9 9950X is of course the flagship variant. That's assuming we don't count the X3D processors, which are going to launch at a later date. So an Anantech forum member by the name of Igor Kavanaski, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, has managed to post some results from an engineering sample CPU that someone else possessed. Now, I do want to point out that this is an engineering sample, therefore it's an earlier piece of silicon and things could definitely change for the final product release. With this said, the benchmarks were conducted with reasonable memory settings. We have DDR5 8000 with the memory tuned to CL34, 45, 40, 42. Now again, later AGESA versions and final silicon could possibly improve the memory results, but for now, that's just what we have. Now, the three results here are all from Ada64, and they are AES, FP32, and finally FP64. You can see from the image that the Zen 5 based CPU wrecks both the 13900K from Intel, as well as a couple of AMD previous generation offerings. If you compare it against the Ryzen 9 7950X, which of course is based on the Zen 4 architecture, we're looking at up to a 45% improvement in performance. Now, naturally speaking, different applications will scale differently on Zen 5, just as you would expect from any CPU architecture, well, ever. So the official numbers that AMD have provided with Zen 5 tell us that we're looking around a 16% average gain over Zen 4. But even so, I think this is pretty impressive. So, from AMD, let's move on to Sony's PlayStation 5, and this story is very interesting. Basically, it insinuates that Sony are working on backwards compatibility for PlayStation 3 games to be able to run natively on PS5 hardware. Now, I'm sure most of you know that the PS5 can currently run PS4 games absolutely no problem, and there have been some other titles which have been kind of ported to the PlayStation 5, basically PS2 games using some kind of like emulators and stuff like that, but it's not exactly the same thing as being able to take, let's say, a PS3 disc and then plonk it into your system and then run whatever you would like. Now, I'm sure you would agree, even if you could only play PlayStation 3 games, it would give an absolutely huge boost to the PlayStation 5's library, especially if they could, let's say, run the games at higher resolution or other improvements as well, and I think that would definitely be possible in some cases, or at the very least, if the game had, let's say, an unstable frame rate, let's say it dipped from like 27 FPS if it's a 30 FPS title, it would be pretty cool if it was able to play, let's say, 30 FPS locked and maybe with a higher internal resolution. Well, now there are a couple of reports floating around from industry insiders. The first of which is Xbox Era's Nick Baker, and we also have Giant Bomb's Jeff Grubb. Nick Baker has claimed that Sony is working on select PlayStation 3 backwards compatibility, but he's not been able to basically provide more information. Meanwhile, Jeff Grubb on his podcast said that he's been hearing about this and it's been in the works for quite some time. I thought it was going to be revealed earlier this year when I first heard about it, but it hasn't happened, and maybe it will never happen, or maybe it does. End quote. So I decided to reach out to a couple of sources regarding this. Now, interestingly, someone who gave me a lot of the PS5 Pro information, which has been pretty accurate actually as now, well, it hasn't been officially confirmed, but with all the other leaks, it does seem to be pretty accurate anyway with what I put out. One of those sources had told me that Sony were allegedly considering putting PlayStation 3 emulation on the PS5 Pro as kind of an additional feature, but they weren't 100% certain if it was only going to be PS5 Pro or if it was going to be like a bonus for also PS5 owners. And yeah, honestly, I kind of just wasn't really thinking too much of it at that point because I wasn't really able to get this information from anyone else. On the other hand, now I've spoken to a couple of other sources and there were some interesting things. So one person did tell me that yes, PlayStation 3 emulation is being considered from Sony. However, the exact state of things is somewhat up in the air right now. Now, whether this is going to be just for a selected game-by-game basis, so, for example, you would be able to play, let's say, just a small percentage of your library, or whether you would be able to just put in any game into your PlayStation 5, that's not been 100% determined. Basically, they were getting some mixed information themselves, just like Jeff Grubb and so forth. Now, another very interesting thing, however, they also told me PS1 and PS2 emulation was also being considered from Sony, but that would be actually kind of challenging because it would potentially mean some type of microcode update for the console as well to be able to allow those games to be playable because of, the physical discs being put into the system. So again, they're not 100% certain whether that was just something that was being talked about or whether something that they actually have kind of decided, well, we're going to just continue, or whether it's just going to continue in the current form and basically some games are going to be available as basically digital downloads and that's going to be the extent of it. Now, in regards to the PS3 emulation, there are a couple of things to be aware of. Now, firstly, there could be some problems with licenses for games. However, again, that's kind of difficult to 100% be aware of because obviously licenses can be kind of a bit weird, especially for games which have gone out of print or what have you, and some studios could maybe require, authorization. This is something that Xbox has had to deal with as well, and obviously some games just might have some hinky problems anyway, and one of those hinky problems is to do with the nature of how games are created using the PlayStation 3. Now, basically the PS3 essentially utilizes the Cell processor, and the Cell is actually a very intriguing architecture. I would highly suggest you guys, do a quick read up if you're not too familiar with it, but basically there is a single processor core which is capable of handling 2 threads, but a bunch of helper cores which are known as SPEs. And those are actually ridiculously powerful. They can do a crap ton of different stuff. They can run anything from physics and simulations to being able to help with graphic stuff and a bunch of other crap besides. Now, early on in the PlayStation 3's life cycle, well, basically games developers weren't really utilizing that, and that's why a lot of games early on were basically just performing better on the Xbox 360, because essentially the 360's architecture, I am simplifying things here by the way significantly, but the PlayStation 3's architecture was just harder to get a grasp on. But as developers, for example Naughty Dog and so on, began to get more familiar with the architecture, they were able to wrangle a lot more from the Cell, and by golly, they managed some very impressive stuff. I remember, for example, when I played Uncharted, like Uncharted 2 and 3, I was like, holy crap. It honestly felt like it was a different generation compared to what early PS3 games were like, and Infamous 2 was just damn, the amount of destructible physics, it was just so damn cool. The problem is, though, that the emulator would have to essentially, emulate that. So there is, of course, no Cell processor inside of the PlayStation 5. I'm, kind of shocking you there, I know, with that massive piece of technical news. So that would mean it would have to be emulated somewhere or another in software. Now, the PC has PlayStation 3 emulators, and it kind of brute forces stuff to a degree. So it's possible some of the stuff that's being run on the Cell could be basically offloaded to GPU compute. So it's going to be very interesting to know, it's going to be very interesting if that does occur. I would personally love it. I think it would be amazing to see some of those games which are essentially locked to the PlayStation 3. But you guys can comment down below some of the games that you can think of that have been locked essentially to the PlayStation 3 consoles, like even Infamous 1 and 2. I don't think you can play them on it. I don't think they were ported to the PS4 or anything like that. Obviously, we've seen a lot of games have been, but there are many titles which are essentially locked to that console, and I would love Sony to do this. It would be incredible. And I'm kind of a sucker for great game preservation. I am primarily a PC gamer, as regular viewers know. However, with that said, you know, I do like physical media, and I think, you know, there is definitely something to the idea of game preservation and being able to play games, you know, like, I don't really want to go down a whole tangent, but to me this would be incredible and really allow people to, you know, being able to experience games that perhaps they missed the first time around, maybe they were too young or just didn't own a PS3, what have you, or just want to relive those memories, and some of those games are still so damn good. With that said, guys, I'm going to let you all go. By the way, apologies for wearing a sleeveless vest in today's video. As you may be able to tell, I'm sweating. It is so damn hot in the UK at the moment. I've had to close up the windows and turn off like fans and stuff like that for recording. So it's either I wear this and record, or I, you know, probably pass out during the recording process and the video doesn't get uploaded. With that said, take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.